Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about macromolecules of life. And we will be concluding the series today by talking about nucleic acids, which is part 4 of the 4 videos. So just to go over what macromolecules mean again, macro means large, and from this we can imply that macromolecules of life are just large molecules that make up living things. So essentially, they're really vital things for our bodies um, that help us with bodily functions. So let's go over what we have talked about so far. We talked about carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Today we will be talking about nucleic acids. Um, if you want to go over these 3 nucleic acids or these 3 macromolecules, you can find the videos on our YouTube page. And actually, it's kind of recommended that you watch each of the videos in this series so that you can kind of get a hang of what we're doing by this part, which is the last part. All right, so nucleic acids, what are they? On this first slide, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. So the first one, ribonucleic acid, which is also RNA, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and ATP, adenosine triphosphate. These are the most common, most heard of nucleic acids, and as I mentioned before, not only are these nucleic acids important, but every single macromolecule is super, super important to the completion of many bodily functions that, help us, for example, breathe, digest food. All of these macromolecules are really important for that. So yeah, let's look a little bit more into the function of nucleic acids. So nucleic acids functions are generally divided into 3 subgroups. So the first, you're going to find energy carriers, things like ATP. Then you're going to find intracellular messengers like RNA. And then you're going to find nucleic acids that contain genetic information, and these play a very, very important role. So these are going to be things like DNA and RNA. So on the right, I have a picture of some of the functions of more specific nucleic acids, so like mRNA, tRNA, and rRNA. And you can take a second to read over that. So pause the video if you want to read over that. But generally speaking, nucleic acids functions are going to be divided into 3 subcategories like these 3. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So let's look at the structure of nucleic acids. Nucleic acids contain, or actually are made of, long chains of molecules called nucleotides. So this term is going to be very important to understanding how we look at nucleic acids. And all nucleotides are made up of a sugar. So we have a sugar component inside of a nucleic acid. And this sugar, for example, can be deoxyribose, ribose, and these are the sugar aspects of things like DNA and RNA. The deoxyribo, those are the sugar aspects. Okay, and secondly, all nucleotides are made up of a phosphate group, so obviously this contains phosphorus, and in addition to that, it has a very high potential energy, the phosphate group inside of the nucleotide. And the final component of a nucleotide is going to be a nitrogenous base. This means that it contains nitrogen, obviously, and the nitrogenous base can differ among nucleotides. So this means that with every nucleotide, there can be a different version of the nitrogenous base. So let's take a look at the basic foundation of a nucleic acid. So as I mentioned before, we have a sugar. And this diagram up here is just going to be a nucleotide. So we have one nucleotide here. All right. So let's look at where we can find the sugar aspect inside of this nucleotide. All right, so we found our sugar right here because as it's labeled here, this is the ribose factor. So you're going to find hydrogens, oxygens, OH, H, all of that inside of your sugar ring, I guess. And then next we have a phosphate group. So let's look for our phosphate group, which is going to be here. This one is going to be typically larger than your sugar, but remember that with every single nucleotide, it can differ. And remember that this is just one nucleotide, but if we look at something like RNA, we're going to have multiple of these entire units linked together. All right, and now let's look at our nitrogenous base. So over here we have our nitrogenous base. It looks a little bit complicated, but remember that, again, with every single nucleotide, your nitrogenous base can differ a little bit. Awesome. So now let's take a look at RNA and let's see where we can find each of these components of the nucleotide. First, we want to define what our nucleotide might look like. So let's take a look at these two diagrams up close a little bit. In this, we have one phosphate group. In each nucleotide, we have a phosphate group, a ribose or a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. So first, let's identify our nitrogenous base. We have one here, we have another one here, another one here, and another one here. So in total, we have 4 nitrogenous bases, all in this this link or this chain. Now let's look for our sugar. We have one sugar here, one here, one here, and one here. Notice how all of these are the same, yet we have differing nitrogenous bases. So remember how I said that the nitrogenous base can actually differ among nucleotides, but the sugar is going to stay the same. And finally, let's look for our phosphate group. So we have one here, one here, one here, and one here. And notice how they're all the same again. So when you're looking at different diagrams, they're not necessarily going to be arranged like from nitrogen to sugar to phosphate. So what you're really looking for are the elements that make up each of these rings. So in phosphate groups, we're looking for oxygen, phosphorus. In the sugar groups, we're looking for oxygen and hydrogen, which we can see here. And in the nitrogenous base, we're looking for nitrogen, obviously. And remember how each nitrogenous base can differ. So the key thing you're looking for is the nitrogen element in each of these 4 nitrogenous bases. Okay, so now that we've identified what each aspect of the nucleotide is, let's divide this. So we notice that we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 of each of the aspects. So we have 1 nitrogenous base, 1 sugar, and 1 phosphorus or phosphate group. So we have 1 nucleotide here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here, which makes it pretty easy to note that we have 4 total nucleotides linked in this chain. All right, so hopefully this video cleared up a lot of things for you about nucleic acids, and we've reached the end of our macromolecules series. If you have any questions about anything that we've discussed so far, not only about nucleic acids, but about all of the other macromolecules, feel free to reach out to us. We will link our email, our website, and all of our social media platforms down in the description box below. And we are excited to hear from you. So now I'll just briefly go over what we did in this presentation today. So we have macromolecules of life. Remember, we go over the prefix of macromolecules to note why they are so important. We went over the 4 different macromolecules. First, we started off with defining some examples of nucleic acids, and we looked at their structure, we looked at the different types of nucleic acids, then we looked at their functions, and we have a broad range of functions here. And then over here, we have a more selective, more narrow definition of each of the functions of these nucleic acids that are presented in this picture. All right, and now we look at the structure where most of the action happens. So we have these long chains of molecules called nucleotides. Each nucleotide is made up of a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base. We looked at this in the form of this diagram, and then we looked at RNA and its 4-chain sequence. So yeah, if you have any questions, please let us know. We're excited to see you next time. Bye.